Saint Faustina Kowalska was born on August 25, 1905, in the small village of Głogowiec in Poland, the third of 10 children of a deeply Catholic but materially poor family. Her parents, Stanisław and Mariana, were simple peasants who lived by working the land. Despite the simplicity and economic difficulties, the home was marked by prayer, solid faith, and trust in God. Poland at that time suffered under foreign domination, divided among 3 powers, and the life of rural families was hard, marked by arduous work and constant dependence on divine providence. In this humble and suffering setting, the young Helena Kowalska was born, who would later be known throughout the world as Saint Faustina, the Apostle of Divine Mercy. From childhood, Helena showed signs of deep spiritual sensitivity and devotion to God. Even as a very small child, she surprised her parents with an intense love for prayer and with a piety uncommon for her age. While other children played, she often preferred to withdraw into prayer or to contemplate in silence. Her early years were marked by a simple life, yet full of spiritual experiences. Helena did not stand out for intelligence or human skills, but rather for her goodness, her love for the poor, and her generosity, which already manifested themselves early on. This childhood would shape the saint who, years later, would bring to the world a fundamental message from Christ: mercy. At school, Helena showed simplicity and humility. She did not receive an advanced education, studying only the basics, since her family could not offer her more opportunities. Even so, her teachers described her as an obedient, calm girl whose faith overflowed into her daily behavior. Many neighbors testified that, from an early age, she sought to live differently, marked by a desire for holiness. Her life seemed destined to follow the path of simplicity and rural work, but God's call was already imprinted on her soul, preparing her for an extraordinary mission that would cross all boundaries. The historical context of the time also shaped Helena's spirituality. Poland lived through a period of political tensions, marked by wars, divisions, and social instability. The Polish people found in the Catholic faith a fortress against adversity, and popular devotion was very intense. Masses, processions, and Marian prayers were part of everyday life, and Helena absorbed this spirit from an early age. It was a time when families lived around the parish, and priests had a central role in community life. In this deeply religious environment, Helena's vocation flourished, showing that God chooses the small and humble to accomplish great works. Helena's adolescence was marked by hard work to help her family. From a young age, she worked as a domestic servant in the homes of wealthy families in order to contribute to the support of her parents and siblings. Despite the difficulties, she never abandoned her life of prayer. She always found time to go to church, spend long moments before the Blessed Sacrament, and pray the Rosary with fervor. These simple gestures, hidden from the eyes of the world, were the fertile ground where God was preparing his future messenger. Her daily life seemed ordinary, but it was sustained by a burning faith. A striking episode in her youth was the first clear call from God to religious life. Helena was only 7 years old when she first heard the voice of Christ in her heart, calling her to a consecrated life. This call remained alive over the years, even when she tried to ignore it or drown it out with the tasks of daily life. Her soul was already destined for a path different from that which most of her friends would follow. While many thought of marrying and starting families, Helena felt in her heart a deep desire to give herself entirely to the Lord. However, Helena's family did not immediately support her vocation. Her parents, although devout, were realistic and did not understand how they could afford their daughter's entry into a convent. Moreover, as one of the eldest among the siblings, Helena had responsibilities within the home and in the support of the family. This family resistance brought suffering, but also strengthened her perseverance. The saint learned early on that following God's will requires sacrifice, renunciation, and courage in the face of incomprehension. During this time, Helena also began to have mystical experiences that she did not yet fully understand. She felt in her soul the presence of God in an intense and profound way, but she did not know how to explain what she was living. These moments of grace strengthened her and set her apart from the others. Her spirituality was beginning to take shape, even though it was still something hidden from the world's eyes. It was like a flame burning in secret, awaiting the moment when God would reveal it in all its intensity. Helena's simple life, marked by humble work and poverty, was essential for her future mission. By experiencing need and difficulties, she learned to trust entirely in divine providence. This absolute trust would later be the foundation of the message of divine mercy, to trust in Jesus, even amid the greatest tribulations. Helena would not only speak about mercy, but would live this reality deeply from the earliest years of her life. In the end, her childhood and adolescence, although apparently ordinary, were the foundation of an extraordinary life. God, in His wisdom, prepared His messenger in silence and simplicity, far from the gaze of the world. Each small gesture of prayer, each silent sacrifice, each tear shed in the face of difficulties were seeds sown in the fertile soil of her soul. And when the right time came, these seeds would blossom into a mission that would transform the history of the Church and touch millions of hearts throughout the world. The revelation of divine mercy. Helena's call to religious life intensified in her youth, especially at the age of 16, when she began to work as a domestic servant in Łódź, a larger and busier city than her native village. It was during this period that the world began to offer her distractions, invitations to parties, and proposals for a common life among young people her age. However, amid these experiences, Helena always felt an inner voice telling her, "My daughter, I call you to something greater." This voice of Christ, which had accompanied her since childhood, became increasingly insistent. Despite her simplicity and her family's opposition, Helena understood that her life did not belong to her, but should be given entirely to God. A striking episode occurred when Helena was 19 years old. At a party with her sister, while everyone danced and had fun, she had a vision of Christ scourged, covered with wounds, who said to her, "How long will you keep me waiting?" This moment marked her deeply and was decisive in her decision to abandon everything to follow Christ. She left the party immediately and went to the nearest church, where she prostrated herself before the Blessed Sacrament, asking God to show her the way clearly. This mystical experience revealed the intensity of her vocation and the urgency of Christ's call. It was no longer a vague desire, but a direct order from the Lord. Determined to do God's will, Helena sought to enter several religious congregations. However, her poverty was a barrier. Many convents required a dowry or financial resources that the young woman did not possess. This difficulty did not make her give up, but proved her like gold in the fire. Helena continued to pray and to ask for guidance, certain that God would not call her to a mission without opening the doors for her. This time of trials strengthened her trust in the Lord and prepared her for the great mission He would entrust to her, to become the apostle of divine mercy. After many attempts and refusals, Helena found acceptance in the congregation of the Sisters of Our Lady of Mercy in Warsaw. This congregation had the mission of receiving and educating young women at social risk, especially marginalized women and victims of violence. The charism of the congregation, oriented toward mercy, was already a prophetic sign of the mission Helena would perform in the future. There, she found her place, understanding that God had prepared everything perfectly. Community life and contact with needy young women would be the fertile ground for the revelation of the divine message. Upon entering the convent, Helena received the religious name of Sister Maria Faustina, in honor of Saint Faustus, a martyr of the Church. The name symbolized a new life, totally consecrated to Christ. From the beginning, Faustina stood out for her obedience, humility, and spirit of sacrifice. She was not known for great human talents, but for her availability to serve. She performed simple tasks such as cooking, tending the garden, and begging for bread for the young women received by the congregation. These humble functions, which many might despise, were for Faustina occasions to offer silent sacrifices to God. During the first years of religious life, Faustina faced very intense interior trials. She lived moments of great spiritual consolation, in which she felt the presence of Christ in a palpable way, but also periods of aridity, in which she seemed abandoned. This alternation between light and darkness forged her soul, making her more mature in the faith. Faustina learned to trust not in feelings, but in the certainty that Christ was always with her, even when he seemed distant. This interior experience was fundamental for the mission that would be entrusted to her, for divine mercy requires absolute trust. Community life was not easy for Faustina. Some sisters did not understand her mystical experiences and even treated her with suspicion or mockery. Her simplicity, however, made her endure humiliations with patience and love. She saw in difficulties an opportunity to unite herself more deeply to the crucified Christ. Instead of defending or justifying herself, she silently offered her pains out of love for Jesus and for the conversion of sinners. This ability to transform suffering into an offering sanctified her life and made her ever more similar to the Christ who called her. A central aspect of her spirituality since the novitiate was a deep love for the Eucharist. Faustina spent long moments before the Blessed Sacrament, finding there her strength and refuge. For her, each communion was an intimate encounter with Jesus, and her life revolved around this mystery. Besides the Eucharist, she cultivated a filial devotion to the Virgin Mary, to whom she turned constantly in her moments of difficulty. Mary was for her a model of total surrender to God, and under her protection she found courage to persevere in her mission. Faustina also stood out for her compassion for the poorest and most needy. Inside the convent, she treated the young women received there with tenderness, seeking to see them through Christ's eyes. Many of them came from situations of misery, abandonment, or sin. But Faustina saw in them beloved daughters of God. Her way of serving was not merely fulfilling an obligation, but expressing the merciful love of the Lord. This practical living of mercy prepared her soul to be the chosen messenger who would bring to the whole world the devotion to divine mercy. Sister Faustina's life in this initial period of religious life seemed discreet and hidden. Her simple tasks, her internal difficulties, and even the misunderstandings she suffered gave the impression of an ordinary life inside a convent. But in reality, God was polishing her soul for an extraordinary mission. Every detail of her routine was providential: the humiliations, the humble work, the consolations, and the spiritual dryness. All of this was a silent preparation for the great revelation that would transform the spiritual history of the 20th century. Thus, the young Helena Kowalska, now Sister Maria Faustina, left behind the simple life of a peasant to embrace religious life with courage and humility. Her entrance into the convent was not only the fulfillment of a personal dream, but the beginning of a mission that God had planned since her childhood. There, amid the ordinary life of prayer, work, and sacrifice, Christ would begin to reveal to her profound secrets about his infinite mercy. The call had been answered, and now the path of the mission that would forever mark the Church and the world began. After her entry into the congregation of the Sisters of Our Lady of Mercy, Faustina began to live a period of intense mystical experiences. Already during the novitiate, she began to hear the voice of Christ clearly in her heart, calling her to an ever greater intimacy with Him. This voice was not merely the fruit of her meditations, but a living and personal communication from Jesus, who guided, corrected, and strengthened her. Many times, this presence of Christ manifested itself in visions, interior locutions, and feelings of profound union. Experiences that definitively marked her spiritual journey and opened the way for the mission of divine mercy. One of the most decisive moments of her life occurred on February 22, 1931, in the cell of the convent in Poix. On that occasion, Sister Faustina had the vision that would become the central mark of her mission, the merciful Jesus. She reported in her diary that she saw Christ dressed in a white tunic, raising one hand to bless while the other rested on his chest. From the heart of Jesus came forth two great rays of light, one red, symbolizing the blood, and the other pale, representing the water. This image engraved itself deeply in her soul and was accompanied by a direct order from Christ to paint a picture according to the model she saw and to spread the devotion to the whole world. Jesus said to Faustina, "Paint an image according to the model you are seeing, with the inscription, 'Jesus, I trust in you.'" These words, which today are known by millions of faithful, were the synthesis of the message entrusted to her: absolute trust in the mercy of Christ. Faustina, frightened by the mission, felt herself incapable and inadequate for such a great task. However, Jesus insisted that she not act by her own strength, but be only an instrument of His will. This experience marked the official beginning of her mission as the Apostle of Divine Mercy. After this first vision, Faustina began to have frequent encounters with Christ, who instructed her about the devotion and the means by which humanity should turn to His mercy. Jesus asked her not only for the image, but also for the institution of the Feast of Mercy on the first Sunday after Easter. He explained that on that day, special graces would be poured out upon those who trusted in His mercy and received the sacraments. This extraordinary promise was later confirmed by the Church and became an essential part of the universal liturgical calendar. However, Faustina did not find it easy to transmit these revelations. For a long time, she faced incomprehension, both from some sisters in the community and from her superiors. Many considered her merely a simple and uneducated young woman, incapable of understanding profound theological matters. This distrust generated great suffering in her heart, for she knew that the message came directly from Christ, but she feared being accused of illusion or even psychological imbalance. Even so, she persevered in silence, always obeying her confessors and waiting for God's timing. Divine providence placed in her path Father Michał Sopoćko, a confessor and spiritual director who recognized the authenticity of Faustina's mystical experiences. He was the one who encouraged her to write everything that Jesus told her in a diary, a document that today is one of the greatest spiritual treasures of the contemporary church. Under the guidance of her confessor, Faustina also succeeded in having the image of the merciful Jesus painted for the first time in Vilnius by the artist Eugeniusz Kazimierowski, according to the saint's descriptions. Although Faustina was dissatisfied because she thought the painting did not reflect all the beauty of Christ, Jesus told her that it was not the perfection of the art that mattered, but the grace He would pour out upon those who venerated the image. These visions were not limited to the image. Christ also entrusted to Faustina special prayers, such as the Chaplet of Divine Mercy. In this prayer, recited with the ordinary rosary, Jesus promised to grant abundant graces and even to relieve sinners at the moment of death if it were recited with faith. The chaplet became one of the pillars of the devotion to divine mercy and is prayed daily throughout the world today. Faustina received these revelations not for herself, but so that the entire church might be strengthened in trust in God. Moreover, Jesus revealed to Faustina the desire that, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the so-called hour of mercy, the faithful should turn to him in prayer, recalling his passion and death on the cross. This moment would become a privileged encounter with the divine mercy, in which one can ask the Lord for anything with confidence. For Faustina, this devotion was a school of trust, surrender, and intercession, which helped the faithful to understand that the mercy of Christ is greater than any sin or human misery. Even in the face of the grandeur of the revelations, Faustina continued to live in the simplicity of convent life. Her daily duties did not change. She cooked, cleaned, and took care of humble tasks, always uniting her work with her mystical experiences. This contrast between the grandeur of the messages and the simplicity of her life revealed the divine logic. God chooses the little ones to confound the great and manifests his power in weakness. Faustina never sought human recognition, but only to obey Christ and faithfully transmit his message of mercy. The first visions of the merciful Christ marked the beginning of a mission that would outlast Faustina's life and reach all humanity. They were not isolated experiences, but a divine project that involved the church and the whole world, especially in a time of wars and sufferings. Christ, through Faustina, offered a last plank of salvation, trust in his infinite mercy. These visions, recorded in her diary, became a beacon of hope, showing that, even in the face of the greatest human miseries, the mercy of God always prevails. Under the guidance of Father Michał Sopoćko, Saint Faustina began to record in notebooks everything that Jesus revealed to her. This work resulted in the famous diary of Saint Faustina Kowalska, also known as the Diary of Divine Mercy. It is an extraordinary work, composed of thousands of pages that describe her mystical experiences, her prayers, her intimate dialogues with Christ, and the instructions he entrusted to her. Far from being a simple personal testimony, the diary became a true spiritual manual, in which Jesus shows the world the depth of his mercy and the way to obtain it. Each page is a living revelation of God's love for every human soul. The diary was not written in a linear fashion, like a book planned from the start. Faustina wrote according to the directions of her confessor and the interior promptings she received from Christ. Many times, she felt unable to express in words what she was living interiorly, for the mystical experiences exceeded her human capacity. However, in her obedience, she recorded everything with simplicity and clarity. The result was a rich, profound text, full of spiritual beauty, which would become a source of inspiration for millions of faithful around the world. One of the central aspects of the diary is Christ's insistence on trust. The phrase, "Jesus, I trust in you," appears repeatedly as the synthesis of the devotion to divine mercy. Jesus explains to Faustina that the greatest pain of his heart is the distrust of souls, especially those who should trust the most. Consecrated souls. He asks that everyone, especially sinners, approach his heart with trust, because he is all love and mercy. This message breaks the vision of a God who is only judge and shows the tender and merciful face of Christ, who desires to forgive and save. Another essential point of the diary is the relationship between mercy and trust. Jesus teaches Faustina that mercy is the last resort for humanity before his definitive return as judge. He offers the world the opportunity to draw near to him, to open the heart, and to receive the abundance of his graces. But this mercy can only be received by those who trust. Trust, in this sense, is not just a feeling, but a total abandonment into the hands of God, recognizing one's own misery and allowing Christ to act. This spirituality of trust is the heart of the devotion revealed to Faustina. The diary also presents the concrete practices of the devotion to divine mercy. Besides the image with the inscription, "Jesus, I trust in you," Christ asked for the institution of the Feast of Mercy, the prayer of the Chaplet of Mercy, and the hour of mercy at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. These practices are not parallel devotions, but concrete means by which Christ desires to pour out his graces upon the world. Each of them has specific promises and powerful spiritual fruits. The feast, for example, brings a plenary indulgence. The chaplet obtains mercy even for the dying, and the hour of mercy is a privileged moment to ask for graces. Throughout the diary, Jesus also reveals his immense love for sinners. He states that the greater the sin, the greater the right the soul has to his mercy. This statement, which may seem shocking, shows the divine logic that goes beyond human logic. Christ did not come for the righteous, but for sinners, not to condemn, but to save. Faustina is chosen as a witness of this radical love, so that no one, no matter how far away, may lose the hope of reconciliation with God. This message brings comfort and hope to the most wounded hearts. Faustina also writes about the sufferings she offered for the salvation of souls. Christ showed her the dangers that threatened humanity, especially sins against life and against purity. He asked her to intercede, offering her sufferings and sacrifices in reparation. In the diary, we find impressive descriptions of her mystical participation in the sufferings of Christ, uniting herself to his passion. These experiences, though painful, were lived with love, for Faustina understood that each sacrifice helped in the salvation of many souls. Her life thus became an offering of mercy. The diary also reveals moments of great tenderness between Faustina and Christ. In various passages, Jesus presents himself as a bridegroom, passionate for her soul, consoling and encouraging her in difficulties. This spousal relationship shows that religious life is not only service, but a deep and loving union with God. At the same time, Christ did not hide from her the gravity of the mission and the responsibilities she bore. It was a call of love, but also of great demand, in which Faustina had to be faithful to the end, even in the face of the greatest incomprehensions. Despite the richness of her revelations, the diary was not immediately accepted by everyone. Many doubted the veracity of the experiences and feared exaggerations. Faustina, in her humility, bore these criticisms without defending herself. She knew that her mission was not to convince, but to obey. Time and the confirmation of the Church would later show the authenticity and immense value of her writings. Today, the diary is considered one of the greatest treasures of Catholic spirituality of the 20th century, comparable in importance to the writings of great mystics such as Saint Teresa of Avila and Saint John of the Cross. In summary, the Diary of Saint Faustina is not merely a personal record, but a prophetic message for all humanity. It reminds us that the time of mercy is now, before the time of justice arrives. On each page, the urgent appeal of Christ resounds to trust in his mercy, to turn to him with faith, and to carry this message to every heart. Faustina, with her simple and obedient life, became the secretary of divine mercy, writing not only words, but the very will of Christ for the modern world. Among the most important revelations that Jesus entrusted to Saint Faustina is the prayer of the Chaplet of Mercy. This prayer was born in September 1935 when Faustina had an impressive vision. She saw an angel sent to punish a sinful city, but before her humble prayer, God taught her words that stayed the arm of justice. Christ showed her that, through this supplication, he would pour out mercy upon sinners. Thus was born the Chaplet of Mercy, a simple prayer, made with the ordinary rosary, yet filled with spiritual power. This prayer would be the great instrument of salvation for humanity in times of great trials. Jesus taught Faustina to pray the chaplet with specific formulas addressed to the Eternal Father, offering him the body and blood, soul and divinity of his beloved Son in expiation for sins. Each time the faithful recites this prayer, he unites himself to the sacrifice of the cross and implores mercy for himself and for the whole world. This universal dimension is essential. The chaplet is not only a personal prayer, but an intercession for all humanity. Jesus assured Faustina that this prayer would obtain unimaginable graces, especially for the dying and the most hardened sinners. One of the most extraordinary promises of the Chaplet of Mercy is its efficacy at the moment of death. Jesus told Faustina that, when prayed beside a dying person, he would place himself between the agonizing soul and the Father as the merciful judge. In this way, the soul would receive graces of repentance and salvation. This promise spread quickly among the faithful, who began to pray the chaplet in hospitals, at deathbeds, and even in cemeteries, imploring mercy for those who leave this world. The chaplet thus became a bridge between heaven and earth at the most decisive moment of human life. Another devotion revealed to Faustina was the practice of the hour of mercy, to be made every day at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the moment when Christ died on the cross. Jesus explained that this hour is privileged, for at it the human heart must unite itself to the sacrifice of Calvary. He asked that, whenever possible, at that time one make a brief prayer before the Blessed Sacrament, or, at least, in the silence of the heart. One may meditate on the Passion, pray the chaplet, or offer small supplications. Christ promised that, at 3 o'clock, nothing would be refused to those who ask with faith in his name. The hour of mercy is not merely a pious devotion, but a true school of spirituality. It teaches us to place at the center of Christian life the mystery of the cross, and to open the heart to the abundance of grace poured out at that moment. Jesus wished that the faithful, in recalling his death, might understand that his mercy is infinite and always current. This practice strengthens Christians in the face of difficulties, reminding them that they are not alone. At 3 o'clock, the mercy of heaven descends upon earth with special intensity. Both the Chaplet of Mercy and the Hour of Mercy were concrete requests of Christ, who wished to offer humanity effective instruments of salvation. He did not entrust to Faustina only personal mystical experiences, but prayers and practices that should be lived by all the faithful. The simplicity of these devotions shows the love of God. They are not complicated rites, but supplications accessible to everyone, even to the simplest and poorest people. Thus, the mercy of Christ becomes universal, reaching every soul that turns to him with trust. The Chaplet of Mercy spread rapidly throughout the world, especially after the death of Saint Faustina. Missionaries, priests, and lay people began to spread this prayer, translating it into various languages and teaching it in parishes and communities. Today, it is one of the most prayed devotions on the planet, especially in times of crisis. During wars, pandemics, and catastrophes, the faithful turn to the chaplet as a spiritual weapon capable of reaching the heart of God and changing the course of history. It is proof that the promise made to Faustina remains alive and current. Many testimonies of graces obtained through the recitation of the chaplet have been reported over the decades. People healed, families restored, sinners converted, and even situations of war transformed are attributed to the powerful intercession of this prayer. The same happens with the practice of the Hour of Mercy, which has led countless faithful to experience consolations and miracles. These fruits confirm that Christ's message to Faustina was not only a spiritual appeal, but a concrete gift for modern times, in which sin and hopelessness seem to increase ever more. St. Faustina, in her diary, insisted that these practices should be carried out with trust, and not as mere mechanical repetition. For her, the key lay in the heart that opens and fully trusts in Jesus. The chaplet and the hour of mercy are living expressions of this trust, simple paths by which the soul meets the tenderness of Christ. In praying them, each faithful becomes an intercessor for humanity, collaborating with the work of salvation that Christ desires to extend to all. Thus, the Chaplet of Mercy and the Hour of Mercy are not merely particular devotions of a Polish saint, but universal gifts of the Church for the whole world. They reveal Christ's loving concern for each soul, especially the most needy. In times of darkness, when sin seems to dominate and hopelessness grows, these practices are like beacons of light, pointing to the merciful heart of Jesus. Through them, humanity can find refuge, peace, and salvation, thus fulfilling the mission entrusted to St. Faustina to proclaim to the whole world, "Jesus, I trust in you." The life of St. Faustina, although marked by extraordinary mystical experiences, was not an easy path. On the contrary, it was a life filled with trials, illnesses, and sufferings that configured her ever more to Christ. Early on in the convent, she faced misunderstandings from her sisters in the community, who did not always understand her spiritual experiences. Many saw her as naive, too simple, or even unbalanced. This distrust caused her deep pain, for she knew that what she lived came from Christ, but she had no way to prove it. Her humility, however, made her accept these criticisms in silence, offering them for the conversion of sinners. In addition to the internal difficulties of community life, Faustina bore the weight of fragile health. From a young age, she suffered from physical problems, but it was in the convent that her health rapidly deteriorated. She was diagnosed with tuberculosis, one of the most feared diseases of the time, which slowly consumed her strength. Despite the pain, she never allowed herself to be spiritually cast down. She lived each moment of suffering as an opportunity to unite herself to the passion of Christ. Thus, her sickbed became an invisible altar, where she offered her pain for the salvation of souls and for the spread of the message of divine mercy. In her diary, Faustina describes periods of intense physical pain, weakness, and even the inability to fulfill her duties in the convent. Many times she was sent to sanatoriums for treatment, where she lived with other patients. Even in these places of suffering, her presence radiated peace and hope. She prayed for the sick, consoled them with simple words, and offered her illness in sacrifice. For her, nothing was in vain. Each tear, each cough, each sleepless night was transformed into a silent supplication for those who most needed God's mercy. The spiritual sufferings were even more intense than the physical ones. Faustina went through periods of dark night, similar to those experienced by other great mystics such as St. John of the Cross and St. Teresa of Calcutta. In these phases, she felt abandoned by God, immersed in an interior darkness that made her doubt her own mission. Jesus seemed distant, and her soul was filled with anguish. Yet even in those moments, Faustina did not give up. She continued to pray, to trust, and to offer herself, even without feeling anything. This abandonment amid the void was one of the hardest trials of her spiritual life. Another aspect of her trials was the constant struggle against the tempter. The spiritual enemy sought to deceive her, placing doubts about her visions and trying to make her give up the mission. Many times, Faustina described in her diary intense interior battles in which the devil appeared to her in different forms, trying to frighten her or lead her to discouragement. But her trust in the merciful Jesus always sustained her. With the sign of the cross, with the chaplet, and with the invocation of the holy name of Jesus, she won these battles, proving that mercy is stronger than any force of evil. Despite so much suffering, Faustina maintained a serene joy that impressed those who knew her. Her smile and gentleness were testimony that her strength did not come from herself, but from Christ. Many sisters later recognized that even amid pains, Faustina conveyed peace. This serenity was the fruit of a deep interior life, rooted in trust in God. For her, suffering was not a curse, but a gift that brought her closer to the Lord and allowed her to collaborate with Him in the work of salvation. This vision completely transformed the way she faced adversities. In the convent, she was often assigned to the heaviest tasks, even when already weakened by illness. She accepted everything without complaining, seeing in these situations opportunities for purification. This attitude of surrender and humility sanctified her more and more. Although she was misunderstood by some, there were also sisters who perceived her silent holiness and were touched by her witness. Over time, the community itself recognized that simple, sickly young woman without advanced studies had been chosen by God for a grand mission. Faustina also offered her sufferings for the souls in purgatory. Jesus frequently showed her those souls in need of prayer and sacrifice. She felt in her heart an urgency to intercede for them, relieving their pains and hastening their entry into heaven. This dimension of her mission reveals how her life of suffering had a reach not only earthly, but also eternal. Faustina thus became a bridge between heaven and earth, collaborating with Christ in the work of mercy for the living and the deceased. The progression of tuberculosis slowly consumed her health, leading her to long periods in bed. Even so, she continued to write in the diary, obeying Christ and her confessor. Her last notes are an impressive testimony of faith amid pain. Until the end, she repeated, "Jesus, I trust in you." And this phrase was not only a devotion, but the synthesis of her entire life. Her sufferings were the deepest confirmation of her message, to trust in mercy, even when everything seems lost. Saint Faustina showed the world that suffering, when united to Christ, has immense redemptive value. Her physical and spiritual trials were not in vain, but made the Church fruitful with the message of divine mercy. She teaches us that we must not flee from crosses, but embrace them with trust, knowing that Christ transforms pain into salvation. Her life is a testimony that, however fragile we may be, God can accomplish wonders in us if we give ourselves totally to Him. The last years of St. Faustina's life were marked by intense suffering, but also by an ever deeper union with Christ. Tuberculosis advanced cruelly, weakening her body and robbing her of strength. Even so, her soul remained serene, sustained by hope and trust in the Lord. Faustina did not lament her condition, but offered each instant of pain as a sacrifice for souls and for the spread of the message of divine mercy. Thus, her illness became a living altar, where her life was consumed for the salvation of many. Amid her weaknesses, Faustina continued to receive visions and revelations from Christ. He prepared her for the definitive passage to heaven, promising her that her mission would not end with death. On the contrary, it would be in heaven that she would intercede even more powerfully for humanity. This certainty comforted her heart and gave her strength to endure the last pains. She knew that her short life would not be a waste, but the beginning of a grand work that would extend to the ends of the earth. Her mission was only beginning. On October 5, 1938, at only 33 years of age, Sister Faustina Kowalska died in the convent in Krakow, consumed by tuberculosis. Her death was serene, marked by a profound peace that impressed the sisters who accompanied her. Many testified that, at the moment of her passing, her face lit up as if she had already contemplated the glory of heaven. For the congregation and for those who knew her, her death was at the same time a mourning and a certainty. That simple young woman had faithfully fulfilled her mission and now interceded from above for the spread of the message that Christ had entrusted to her. After her death, Faustina's reputation for holiness began to spread rapidly. many already recognized in her a soul chosen by God and turned to her intercession. The diary, written out of obedience to her confessor, became a source of inspiration for religious and lay people, and the devotion to divine mercy gained strength. However, her mission also faced periods of silence and even distrust on the part of some sectors of the church which prudently analyzed the revelations. But over time, the authenticity of her message was confirmed, and her figure became established as one of the great saints of the 20th century. St. Faustina's legacy quickly crossed the borders of Poland. With the support of Father Michał Sopoćko and other apostles of divine mercy, the devotion spread through Europe and then throughout the world. The image of the merciful Jesus was reproduced in thousands of places, and the prayer of the Chaplet of Mercy came to be recited in various languages. Christ's request for the institution of the Feast of Mercy was carried forward and decades later officially recognized by the Church. Thus, the mission entrusted to the simple young religious reached a universal scope. Faustina's death did not interrupt her work, but gave it even more strength. Many testimonies of graces and miracles began to be attributed to her intercession. The sick were healed, sinners converted, and devotees found hope by turning to divine mercy. Faustina's figure came to be seen as a privileged channel of Christ's love, confirming her words that she would continue helping souls after death. Her short and hidden life then gained worldwide projection, becoming a beacon of hope for humanity. Over time, the Church began the process of beatification and canonization of Faustina. Pope John Paul II, also Polish and deeply devoted to divine mercy, played a fundamental role in this process. In 1993, Faustina was beatified in Rome, and in the year 2000, she was canonized as a saint of the Catholic Church, being proclaimed the Apostle of Divine Mercy. Her canonization was a historic milestone, for on that same day, the Pope officially instituted the Feast of Mercy in the liturgical calendar to be celebrated on the second Sunday of Easter. It was the definitive confirmation of the authenticity of her mission. St. Faustina's legacy is deeply linked to the proclamation of mercy as the last resort for humanity. In a century marked by wars, genocides, and unimaginable sufferings, God raised up a simple young woman to remind the world that salvation lies in the merciful Christ. Her message resounds with special force in the contemporary world, in which many live without hope and far from God. Faustina is thus a messenger of trust, a sign that divine love never abandons his children, no matter how lost they may be. Today, St. Faustina's legacy can be seen in millions of faithful who daily pray the Chaplet of Mercy, venerate the image of the merciful Jesus, and celebrate the Feast of Mercy. Shrines dedicated to her, such as the one in Kraków-Łagiewnicki, attract pilgrims from all parts of the world. Her message remains alive, transforming hearts and drawing souls closer to God. Saint Faustina, with her simple life and full of sufferings, became a symbol of the power of grace that acts in human weakness. Thus, Saint Faustina's death was not an end, but a new beginning. Her legacy remains as a permanent invitation to trust in Christ and to live mercy in daily life. She teaches us that even in the greatest human miseries, there is always a place for forgiveness, for hope, and for God's love. The young Polish peasant, transformed into a saint and apostle of divine mercy, continues to echo in the heart of the Church the eternal appeal of Christ. Jesus, I trust in you. Saint Faustina's message does not belong only to her time, but crosses generations and reaches us with renewed force. In a world marked by violence, selfishness, and the loss of values, the devotion to divine mercy becomes an indispensable spiritual remedy. Jesus, in entrusting this mission to a simple and hidden young woman, wished to show that his mercy is the last hope for humanity. This message, proclaimed in the 20th century, becomes even more relevant in the 21st century, when so many souls stray from the faith and seek meaning in paths that do not lead to true peace. One of the most current aspects of the message of divine mercy is the invitation to trust. In a society marked by anxiety, fear of the future, and instability, the phrase, "Jesus, I trust in you," resounds as a response to human despair. It is not a naive trust, but a deep surrender to the love of Christ, who takes care of every detail of life. Saint Faustina reminds us that trust is the sure path to experience God's mercy. This call is current because the modern world lives precisely a crisis of trust. Everything is distrusted except God. Another essential point of the message is the practice of mercy in daily life. Jesus asked Faustina not only for devotions and prayers, but also for concrete works of mercy, whether by words, actions, or prayers. In the current world, marked by indifference and individualism, this practical dimension is of enormous importance. Every Christian is called to be a reflection of divine mercy, extending a hand to the needy, consoling the afflicted, forgiving those who err, and interceding for those who are far from God. The devotion to divine mercy is not only to pray the chaplet, but to live a lifestyle based on the love that forgives and saves. The institution of the Feast of Mercy, celebrated on the second Sunday of Easter, is also a sign of relevance. This feast is a true renewal of hope, for Christ promised that on that day he would pour out immeasurable graces upon all who approached him with trust. In a world thirsty for forgiveness and reconciliation, this feast becomes a spiritual oasis, an opportunity to begin anew. Thousands of faithful participate in it every year, experiencing the joy of being embraced by the merciful love of Christ. This practice confirms that Faustina's message has not lost its power, but continues to transform lives. The Chaplet of Mercy, today prayed in all parts of the world, is another example of the timeliness of the message. In homes, hospitals, parishes, and even through digital media, millions of people raise their voices to the Eternal Father, asking for mercy for us and for the whole world. This simple and powerful prayer unites Christians of different cultures and languages in a common supplication, showing that mercy is the universal language of the Church. In times of wars, pandemics, and global crises, the chaplet becomes a chain of hope that sustains humanity in the face of its greatest pains. The hour of mercy, observed every day at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, also has enormous value for our time. Amid the rush of modern life, this pause to recall Christ's death on the cross is an invitation to refocus life on God. Many workers, students, and religious stop at this time to pray, even briefly, and experience the peace that comes from the heart of Jesus. This practice is current because it teaches that in any circumstance, the love of Christ can enter our day and transform it. It is a way of keeping the cross at the center of everyday life. Faustina's message also speaks directly to sinners who often feel excluded or unworthy of approaching God. In a world that tends to judge and condemn, divine mercy opens a door of hope. Jesus told Faustina that the greater the sin, the greater the right to mercy. This phrase is a balm for all who bear guilt and deep wounds. The timeliness of this message lies in showing that there is no sin that can overcome God's love, as long as the soul repents and trusts. It is an urgent message of reconciliation for the modern world. The life and message of Saint Faustina also remind us that mercy is the last plank of salvation before the return of Christ as judge. She herself wrote in her diary that Jesus insisted on offering his mercy before exercising justice. In times when so many turn away from the faith and reject God's commandments, this warning is extremely current. Humanity has before it the choice to trust in mercy and find salvation, or to reject it and face justice. Saint Faustina thus becomes a prophet of modern times, pointing to the safe path of mercy. Pope St. John Paul II deeply understood the timeliness of Faustina's message. In canonizing her, he proclaimed that divine mercy was God's answer to the challenges of the new millennium. Since then, the popes have reinforced the importance of this devotion, showing that it is central to the Church's mission. It is not an optional devotion, but an essential message for the time in which we live. Mercy must be the heart of the Christian proclamation in today's world, because only love can overcome hatred, and only forgiveness can defeat sin. In conclusion, the message of divine mercy entrusted to Saint Faustina is more current than ever. In a time marked by hopelessness, it invites us to trust fully in Christ, to practice works of mercy, to pray with faith, and to celebrate mercy as a source of salvation. Saint Faustina shows us that the answer to the world's evils does not lie in human strength, but in surrender to God's merciful love. Her witness remains alive, and her voice resounds in the heart of the Church, tirelessly repeating, "Jesus, I trust in you."